Welcome to Everything is Racist.
And yes, we mean that. Everything is racist.
You either don't care, don't know.
Or don't want to give up the privileges racism gives you.
Brought to you by two cousins.
Tired of the world's mess.
I'm Bettina.
And I'm Jocelyn.
All right, so this is going to be our last recording for this nightmare of a year. So, in 3 words, how would you describe it, Jocelyn?
I would describe 2020 as disappointing, eye-opening, and growth. I know growth is sort of a weird word, but that's what I'm picking.
It's a lot deeper than mine. I'm tired of it. That's 3 words. Tired of it. I wanted to just move on. I'm tired of it.
Exclamation point.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to dilly-dally. We're going to get right into our topic. And this one is very near and dear to our hearts. Food. Yes.
Yep.
Even food can be racist. Not always, the products themselves, but how we view them, how it's distributed, and basically any other way humans have impacted the food industry.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different kind of subsections on food and racism. So we're just gonna tackle a couple of them. And the first one that I want to talk about especially is school lunches, especially school cafeterias, especially in public schools. I don't know how it is in private schools because I didn't go, but there's a lot of think pieces out there, a lot of people expressing their opinions, especially if they're immigrants, about how school cafeterias became such a cesspool of racism in their childhoods. We can link to a bunch of different articles where people kind of explain either their experiences growing up, bringing ethnic foods, or if they're parents and they have children who are growing up in the U.S. and they didn't, kind of their children's experiences with their parents cooking and letting them bring ethnic food to the cafeteria. I want to talk about my experience a little bit because I think that's going to be a little bit more impactful in this discussion. Like I mentioned before, I was born in the Philippines and I moved to the US when I was 9. So I still have pretty strong kind of recollection of the culture shock that I experienced from the get-go when I moved to the US. And some of the first ones I experienced, again, were also in the cafeteria. And the thing is, like, Filipino food is... some Filipino food can be very crazy. Like, our cuisine is very mixed, but then there's also food that is a little bit mild. So one example that I can remember of just a very mild food, but is very common Filipino culture is I brought rice, bacon, and eggs for lunch. And I remember sitting down with some of my friends and other classmates. I think this was probably in the 3rd grade. And they were looking at my food and they were like, "That's so weird. Why are you eating rice and bacon?" And I was like, because this is what I packed for lunch. And also I don't know why that's so strange. Like, for me, like, it wasn't like I wasn't bringing something that was necessarily super ethnic, right? It wasn't like curry, or it didn't stink that much. And a lot of the articles that we can link to, a lot of the kids were bringing kind of ethnic food from their own cultures that were very, very different from standard American lunches. But bacon, rice, and eggs, every American has been exposed to that, maybe not in that combination. But I remember that, and Um, I just felt so embarrassed and ashamed. Um, I always wanted to get Lunchables if I wanted to pack food, but my parents didn't let me because number one, they were kind of expensive for. They are still kind of expensive for like a little amount of food, and the one thing that also irks me now is that memory like really stands out to me because it was one of my first experiences of really being shamed for my culture. And again, it wasn't like something that is very like ethnic and dear to my heart. It's just bacon, rice, and eggs. But I remember a couple of years ago, fairly recently, BuzzFeed did one of their like tasty videos where they were making like fried rice and they were like doing breakfast fried rice with bacon, rice, and eggs. And all these white people on Twitter were going nuts over it. And they were like, oh my God, that's such a cool idea. And I'm like, I was bullied when I was in third grade for eating the same thing. What the I'm sorry. What the I don't know what to say.
What the what?
What? So one of the articles that we can link to kind of talks a little bit about this experience, but also in the workplace. And I think it might have been the NBC one. We'll link and you can go find it. But, a common thing, even in adulthood, is when people complain in the lunchroom about what you're heating up in the microwave. And I haven't necessarily experienced this. I don't know, Jocelyn, if you've had an experience with either you bringing food or coworkers, but I do hear, when I was working in an office, I did hear HR kind of make passive aggressive comments sometimes about, certain things don't belong in the microwave.
I have never experienced that myself. I feel like what I bring is maybe more common foods, like if I'm going to heat it up, but people will say like, oh, like that looks so good. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to eat it.
Yeah, so I just found the article. So it is the NBC News article, but the person who wrote it was explaining how there's another article she linked to that cites Mexican food as one of the top 5 smelliest food you should never bring to the office, which I think is ridiculous because you should be able to just eat whatever you want.
Right.
And again, it goes back to kind of some like xenophobia, I think, and of course racism, in terms of how people view other things that are different. And to me, again, I've never experienced this, but I can see somebody who might bring curry for lunch, and somebody's going to make a comment about like, "Oh my God, the kitchen stinks now." But if somebody brings like brie cheese and leaves it in the refrigerator, nobody's going to say anything. So it's that contrast of what is acceptable because it is more closer to white culture, versus those that are farther from white culture is not acceptable in a professional environment. And another thing that is a little bit more, I think, impactful in terms of, I mean, people's experiences are of course impactful. I mean, if I recall back to my experiences in elementary school and how it impacts me, that's saying something. But for people who actually have cultural or religious like needs in terms of their foods, I know that in one article that I read, in New York City, public schools didn't have a lot of options for Jewish and Muslim students in terms of having kosher and halal foods available. In our experience, so we went to Yukon, Hartford. Don't look it up. We had a kosher station, if you remember, Jocelyn,
Oh, I love it.
and it was great. I'm however, from what I recall too, some of the foods that were not necessarily kosher, they didn't necessarily label properly. And one of our friends who is Muslim, um, like she would like get food that is not supposed to have pork. It's not labeled as having pork, but then as soon as she sat down, there's pork on the plate. There's like bits of bacon because it wasn't labeled properly. And I think like that lack of consciousness and um, that lack of consideration for students and even other people eating at the cafeteria and their needs and their specific cultural and religious needs um, is just making it a lot difficult to operate and to live. Like food gives you life, and if you can't eat food, then how are you supposed to go about being a student? How do you go about being a productive worker or just a person in society when you're not able to have access to foods that are appropriate for your cultural or ethnic or religious needs?
And food also just makes us happy. Like food is good, food is delicious. And our friend who was Muslim, you could tell like it impacted her. It was stressful because they're just sneaking in pork into random things. And I personally don't eat pork. It's not for religious or cultural reasons. I just don't eat it. And I've not had it in, it's almost been 10 years that I've chosen to not eat it. It's been accidental, obviously, because of our college. And so sometimes I would taste test food for this friend and be like, no, don't eat it. And like almost slap a spoon out of her hand because for me, it'd be like, oh, okay, so I had some pork. I'm not super happy about that, but I can move on. Whereas I knew it could impact her in a different way and make her upset. But one, they definitely should be labeling things. And two, they were putting pork in things that did not need pork.
Yeah. Like you can have mac and cheese without putting bacon in it. It's not a requirement.
Or clam chowder without putting bacon or
Yeah.
ham in it.
Mhm. And another thing about this is not part of their discussion topics, but I just thought about it. When we were attending UConn Hartford, like our access to kitchens was pretty minimal. I think it's changed a little bit more now. Um, but I think about kind of the relationship between how the American government kind of has used schools to separate people from their culture. You can kind of look up the like save the man, kill the Indian policies of a lot of boarding schools that took Native children and how schools were pretty much used to remove them from their culture. And this is a little bit drastic, but I can see a sort of light parallel in terms of there wasn't a lot of ethnic foods that was available on campus, and if it was not done properly, it was not done well. And so I can see how for somebody it's difficult to relate back to your culture because food is such a big part of a culture. And so being in a very white space where you don't get to just have a moment to celebrate like where you come from and eat the foods that you grew up with can be a very isolating experience. And I can kind of speak from experience because in Hartford there weren't many Filipinos. There were not any Filipino restaurants anywhere nearby. So for 4 years, basically, I did not have Filipino food. And for me, food is the best way for me to connect back to my culture because I'm not very active in my community. And so I do think that I lost a good part of my self of sense of identity in a weird way. Just not having access to foods that I grew up with and that I associated with being comfortable and being at home.
Yeah. Yukon, Hartford.
Yeah, don't look it up.
Please don't. But I
We're
think
not talking about you heart too, just so you know.
yes,
So
completely,
I don't want any you heart people coming after us.
completely separate school. But we're gonna go into the next topic, which is food deserts. So, the definition of a food desert is basically an area where people have limited access to a variety of healthful foods that aren't crazy expensive. And so, we'll link an article that gives you more information about the USDA's specific definition and all that good stuff. It's a little bit wordy, so I'm not going to read it. But basically, I sort of see food deserts in a few different ways. So, one, you have to travel super far to get to a grocery store, whether it be like, oh, you have to take a bus or a ride share or drive super far. That's one way. Another is if you have a grocery store nearby you, but the food is just too expensive. You'd only be able to buy like an apple. That's not going to feed one person, let alone a family. Another way a food desert can happen is if there are little grocery stores, but maybe they're not stocked with healthful foods. So maybe it only has canned foods instead of fresh foods, or a lot of heavily processed foods. I mean, obviously, those foods can be delicious and they're good in moderation, but as humans, we need a variety of food. We need a variety of fruits and vegetables and a nutritious, balanced diet. And in any of these situations, people are not getting the food that they need if there is a food desert. And it can happen in rural and urban areas. But I feel like we often associate it more with urban areas. And we know that urban areas often have a lot of people of color in them. So that's how it's tying back to racism specifically. But even outside of race, food deserts are still awful. And I personally didn't experience it growing up. Where I'm from in Missouri, there are a lot more, not necessarily like mom and pop local grocery stores, but they're chains specific to that area. So like you couldn't go to like Iowa and see these. Like it was either cities or statewide sort of chains. But when I moved out to the East Coast, I definitely was made more aware of it, either from just studying people in my life telling me about it, or not necessarily, again, me experiencing it, but me seeing like, wow, like I kind of have to go far to go to a grocery store or to find certain things. And because I have a car, it's not necessarily as difficult for me because it may suck to drive somewhere, but I'm very fortunate enough that I can do that. A lot of people who are experiencing food deserts may be in poverty and they may not have the luxury of having a car, so they have to rely on someone else or, again, take a bus or a Lyft or something, and that gets expensive. And especially during a pandemic, people may not feel safe or they may not be able to do that because they're immunocompromised or they know somebody who's immunocompromised and they live with them. So definitely during the pandemic, food deserts have become a bigger issue, and there's definitely ways to fix this, but the government is at fault, like with many things.
I think to add to it, a lot of people kind of associate food deserts with an overall lack of food supply. Um, and it's not necessarily that there's a lack of amount of food, it's how food is being distributed.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I've heard this argument before where it's like, oh, it's just like, this place like just doesn't have a lot of like gardens or whatever, and like that's part of it, right? But a lot of it is also distribution. um Certain grocery stores in certain areas are not getting shipments for more healthy products because it's just that, because of racism. um and if you look at a more like global scale, when people think about, oh, there's like starving children in Africa or something, again, it's not necessarily like there's not an, a shortage of food. Um, it is a deliberate racist approach of the distribution of food.
Absolutely. Especially with like certain chains of grocery stores. Like you may notice where there's a lot of people of color, there may not be like these big chains like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. They may not be in that area unless the place becomes gentrified and more white people move in. Then you'll see like brand, like it may be a smaller chain or like a green or like completely veggie chain or something, or a bigger one like Trader Joe's, but it doesn't happen until they know white people are going to want to access it.
That's the sad part, because there is enough food to go around. There is enough healthy food to go around. It's just a matter of who actually has access to it that is creating these deserts.
Right. And another thing I wanted to add is having organic fruits and vegetables as an option. Like maybe you don't want it, but it's not an option at some grocery stores. And even how long produce produce lasts is like its shelf life. Like if you take home a thing of strawberries and they're spoiled the next day, like what was the point? Like you just wasted $4. And so people aren't going to want to buy healthier foods because they're like, I need this to last several days. I need this to feed my kids and I. And so
Yeah.
There's no sort of reason to buy those foods, even if they are available, because of the shelf life. So a lot of things go into it, and it's just sad, even if it is available, making sure these products get to these grocery stores in time to have a good enough shelf life for someone to want to get it.
To add to that, I just want to address like when people shame people for, especially poor people, for not buying organic foods or not buying like produce a lot and instead opting for canned foods or fast foods. It's not their fault. It's completely not their fault. So you should stop doing that. And, like you're saying, with people who are working class or just very low income, um, having products that are a little bit more shelf stable is better because they might not have the opportunity to cook. They might not have a kitchen. So I just want to address like the shame aspect that tends to come up a lot, especially on Twitter.
Yeah. And to wrap it back to our first topic before you get to our third one. So imagine like at home, you're getting canned foods, frozen foods, like things that aren't nutritious because that's what your family can afford. But at school, there's a variety of fruits and vegetables for breakfast and lunch. And then maybe you even qualify for free or reduced lunch. But then the food that is offered there has pork in it, and you can't eat that. Like, like the inequality gets worse, or worser, as I like to say.
Sir.
Um, and so you're taking away that child's opportunity for the day to get nutritious food that will fill them up. But because either something wasn't labeled, or because you're unnecessarily adding things, or because you're not offering kosher and halal options. Even though it's there in theory, it's not there in practice for every student. And that's all I want to say about food deserts, because again, each of these subtopics could be their own episodes, but we'll keep it moving.
Yeah. So, next thing I want to discuss is my favorite seasoning because it is so freaking great. MSG. MSG is monosodium glutamate. And basically, it is a we'll link to a better explanation, but it is a human produced food additive that is supposed to mimic all of the things that make food taste good. So sodium and glutamate, and that is a lot of different foods are have that naturally occurring. Mushrooms have a lot of the same properties. Parmesan cheese, basically anything that tastes good. The purpose of it was to enhance the umami flavor of food, and it's very common in a lot of Chinese food and a lot of Chinese like not fast food, but like takeout places, like your local mom and pop shop. And MSG has had a long history of um, basically being used as a tool to justify racism. There's a really good documentary, and I'm trying to find it. I'll probably just link it down in the description. I think if it's not right, I'm going to edit this out, but I think it is called In Search of General So. Basically, the whole documentary talks about the main topic of the documentary is trying to figure out where this dish came from. But from what I remember, they had a segment on that really explained why MSG had began getting such a bad rap in American society. And in a nutshell, starting in the 1960s, Chinese restaurants started getting a lot of businesses from people. They were basically this like new other food that people can get because a lot of the times it was like pizza or um, it was a new thing, and a lot of Chinese people were getting businesses. And so sure, some like rich racist person comes along. I'm reducing this down, but essentially this is what happens. Some rich racist person comes along and says MSG is bad for you. It is giving me a headache. It is doing all this terrible things to me. A lot of it is it got picked up by a lot of news sources, I guess, journalists and some scientists who did some phony science, basically, during this time, 1960s to, I would say, 80s. And so this phenomenon called Chinese restaurant syndrome started, and suddenly MSG was being viewed as a terrible food additive that's going to ruin your health. And ever since then, MSG has had a really negative connotation in even in recent times. And I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people in the food industry who are Asian, have been trying to change the narrative a little bit and kind of in exposing why why people thinking that MSG is bad for you is a racist thing. It's really because white people were threatened by Chinese business owners, and they wanted to make sure that they were not getting the economic freedom that they were currently getting in the beginning of the 60s through the 80s.
Jealousy is a consistent thing for them, very on brand.
Yeah. So there's been more recent studies, and again, more people in the food industry who have been saying that MSG it's totally fine for you. There's studies saying that a lot of the side effects that you're feeling when it comes to MSG is it's all anecdotal. Also, a lot of it is bloating, all that. you can get that from just taking regular salt. And salt is a mineral that is naturally occurring. If you consume a lot of salt, you're gonna bloat. It's not the MSG. Like that's just, everything in moderation. So it's not the MSG that's causing you a lot of issues. Probably are eating something else that you probably shouldn't be. Um, Also, people like saying that MSG is bad for you will still go out and eat, me included. I mean, I don't say MSG is bad for me, but like, you know, chicken nuggets made from pink slime. So you,
If you have eaten at McDonald's, you do not need to worry about what is in the vaccine.
yeah, and you don't need to worry about MSG. Again, it's I'll link to different articles explaining why it's not bad for you. It is basically just taking a lot of other compounds that you find that are naturally occurring and putting it into one thing. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say. Like MSG is good. I put it on everything, especially if you are vegan. I am telling you, MSG is a lifesaver. Um, it just, even if you've never had meat, like the the way it just changes the flavoring of the food. It adds more of that umami element where it's a little bit more satisfying, and just brings out the flavor more. It's just good. So stop being racist and just put some MSG on your food. It's also less sodium than table salt, so technically you are reducing your sodium intake. So might be good for you too.
We're going to get you a MSG promotion, some company that makes it. New sponsor.
Accent makes it's MSG. If you ever get accent in a grocery store, it's MSG.
But to get into our last topic, again, I love food. Soul food is one of my favorite cuisines, and we're not going to talk about that today. Again, that could be a whole episode by itself. What I am going to talk about is three different sort of random things that I did not learn until adulthood, and they really just irk my spirit. Black people, when it comes to food and the food industry in America, it's like we can't win for losing. And eventually, we probably would have had an episode on food, but I really wanted to do this episode next based off a tweet that I saw. I know, a tweet, very on brand. And someone had mentioned but butter pecan ice cream is actually really great. Like it's not just for grandmas and grandpas. And in response to that, someone said the reason why a lot of African American people who are older, like who grew up in Jim Crow era, the reason why butter pecan is their favorite flavor of ice cream is because they weren't allowed to have vanilla. And it's sort of one of those things where it's just like, oh my gosh, that's awful, but I'm not at all surprised at all. And so I was like, we got to do an episode on food and we should do it as soon as possible because I'm always hungry and always willing to talk about food at any given moment. But so during the Jim Crow era, Black people usually just weren't served vanilla ice cream, especially in the South. And it was more of a custom or just your everyday racism rather than a law at the time. And then some people say like, oh, Black people were only allowed vanilla ice cream on the 4th of July. And it was so weird because, oh, we're celebrating freedom, but I really don't have that much freedom. Like, yes, I'm not enslaved, but there are still many ways we could improve this country. And what makes it worse is that vanilla ice cream, sort of as we know it now, was improved by an enslaved Black man. Edmund Albius, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but so I'm like, I love vanilla ice cream, and someone improved it and made it better And one, most people probably don't know that. I didn't know that. But also, he probably wasn't even allowed to have that ice cream, and other people weren't allowed to have that ice cream. And it's so weird. It was the symbol of the American dream, but just like the rest of the rights that that white people had at the time that people of color did not have, they weren't getting ice cream and they weren't getting rights. So it was they're consistent. Let's just say that. So that was the first one. Again, we'll link articles, so if you want to read more into it. But that was just sort of the first thing where I was like, oh my goodness, my granny and grandpa, I mean, they probably really did like butter pecan, but it's sad that there was something else most likely underneath that. The next quick subtopic is tipping. And tipping in general is one of the reasons our capitalist society does not function well. But like a lot of things and everything that we talk about on this podcast, tipping is rooted in racism. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. If you want to read it, you can read it for yourself. But basically, the concept of tipping started in Europe and it was brought over to America. Oh my gosh, Europeans, I'm in shock. But although it ended in Europe, and in most places in Europe nowadays, people aren't tipping. It'd be weird if you tipped. It's still going strong in America. And so basically, after enslaved people were freed after the Civil War, a lot of them had to get labor jobs. So being a maid, being a waiter, things like that. And instead of actually paying Black waiters like a normal wage, whatever it was at the time, they refused to pay them and said that they would have to work for tips. And you can imagine, especially in the Jim Crow era in the South, white people were not tipping their Black servers because they were racist. And so
they still aren't, probably.
Yeah, I mean, not to say that, yeah, they definitely are probably doing the same thing now. But that meant that back then, servers were making $0, whereas now there is a minimum. So in America, the minimum wage that's federally mandated, people have to make at least $7.25 per hour, but not for people who work for tips. So people who are like waiters. Federal minimum wage for those people is $2.13.
So basically $0.
Especially in these times. But yeah, it's rooted in that, and definitely has led to continuous cycles of poverty in the African American community. And because there was just limited jobs that people were allowed to do or where they were being hired at, they were sort of stuck. The last one, which is something that I knew of growing up but didn't really know the reason behind it, is the association of watermelon with Black people. So again, growing up, you hear the racist comments like, oh, like you eat watermelon and fried chicken, yada, yada, yada. And I knew it was definitely bad. And I guess it was just never a question as to why we were associated with it, especially because it seemed like a lot of people liked watermelon. Not me, but a lot of people. So again, going back to Jim Crow era, post-slavery, a lot of people did go into sharecropping or farming, and a lot of people began to plant, grow, and sell watermelons. And similar with, I guess, Chinese takeout places, there was a huge boom. It was great. People were buying it. People enjoyed it. Same with the watermelons. Black people were making I don't want to say huge profits, but they were successful and they were doing well in that business. And so it became both a political and a racist agenda to change that perspective of Black people and watermelons. So, because it was just after slavery and people were making all these watermelons, it sort of became a symbol of freedom. Like they were finally able to sort of start their own business and were just free in general. And so white people did not like that and decided to turn it around and make it a negative stereotype rather than something that stood for entrepreneurship and freedom. So they decided to say, like, oh, like if you eat watermelons, you are lazy or you're childlike or you're not intelligent. And because so many Black people were selling watermelons, it quickly became associated with Black people. And you'd see it in cartoons or you'd see it in people doing blackface. It just quickly became associated with Black people. But these things were associated with watermelon at first and not even a race. So they were like, oh, we already associated laziness with watermelons because you can't just sort of take that on the go. Like you have to sit down, you may need a napkin, like it's messy. So it's associated with that laziness. And it was not associated with race at all at first. But they were like, we can immediately make this about Black people who are just making good things for themselves. So I'm sure there's similar stories like fried chicken or whatever else can be associated with it, but it all goes back to the racism and the jealousy that white people had for people of color who were prospering in, and this is just in the food industry. So let's not even talk about like other inventions, but it's like, yeah, it's just so interesting that these things that were at least common in my life, because a lot of people in my family love butter pecan, and obviously tipping is a thing in this society. And then watermelon is big at like cookouts and things like that. I'm just like, wow, these everyday things are so racist.
As soon as people of color have a good thing, white people just have to ruin it.
They'll either steal it or make it look bad.
Yep.
Or they'll make it look bad and then steal it later and act like it was great the whole time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially with food. Oh, my God. You know, if there is like some food trend that comes from a culture, I just want you to know it was probably from like way back before and you're just super late, and for you to like, what was the term for it? Columbus it. And act like this is a new thing and like you're on trend now. Like, just please stop. If you like it now, that's fine. But you don't have to steal it, take it, and be like, oh, look at this new thing that I discovered. Like, no.
But like we said, there is so much to talk about with food. So we're definitely going to have a part 2 because we couldn't cover it in less than an hour.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that because food is everywhere and there is a lot of racism in it, unfortunately. Can't have a good thing. Just leave it at that.
Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And this podcast is available on YouTube. So if you need closed captioning or you want to share it with somebody who needs closed captioning, it will be available on there, and just varying other streaming platforms if people use a different one than you.
Yeah, so we are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and something else probably. But if you just search Everything is Racist or EIR Podcast, you'll probably find us. And we are trying to make this as accessible as possible. And like we said throughout the entire thing, all of the articles and resources that we mentioned, and probably a couple others, will be in the description box for this episode and the rest. So all the information is out there for you.
So, once again, my name is Jocelyn.
And I am Bettina.
Stay safe and season your food.
Yes, with MSG. Bye.
Bye.